We're happy to address any questions that you have about data mining and predictive analytics. This is the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to the Modeling Agency's Advanced Analytic Gurus. We have senior consultants Keith McCormick and today Patrick Rooney, Dr. Patrick Rooney, in place for Scott Terry. And it looks as though, I got a text from Keith a moment ago, he did not have the right credentials. This is one thing in our area of practice. Oftentimes we don't work with exact figures, and that's what's required for dialing into the webinar. I think he had he brought the credentials for a previous event, which won't get him into this. So he will not be able to dial back in, unfortunately. But you'll be in great hands with myself and Dr. Rooney. So we have just a few questions. Again, room for more. We're going to stick around with you till 12:30. We reserved 90 minutes for the webinar, and let's go ahead and start with the first question. This is from Annie. Is this method for a specific type of analytics? Is it meant to work for social media analytics? When you say this method, Annie, can you be more specific about the method? I didn't see exactly what time your question came in. You might have asked that at a time when Keith was presenting a certain method, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to reference it to that. So I'll go on to the next question, but Annie, if you can let us know which method you're referring to, we'll be happy to answer that question. Kartik asks, and I apologize if I'm not getting the pronunciation spot on, when working on models, they become so complex that it becomes difficult to explain business logic to management. How do you tackle this? Patrick, if you'd like me to take that first, I can take a swing at it while you consider a response to it. So when working on models, they become so complex, it becomes difficult to explain the business logic to management. How do you tackle this? Well, I would say that, and I think this is kind of in keeping with what Keith was explaining, is that we should start out with the business question first, and not just one. Because a lot of companies, they'll have 2 or 3 ideas for an analytic project, and there may be numerous reasons why that question cannot be supported. You know, is there data to support the stated question? What's the environment like for deployment to support it? Are there political reasons that it would not succeed? So there's a lot of things that we want to take a look at, and hopefully take those 2 or 3 questions and balloon them into a dozen or 15 that we can then put into a more comprehensive assessment that boils down to a smaller number of valid projects that stem from those questions. But it should start with the questions. Then from there, the analytics will support that question, and the focus remains on you know, the motivations for, you know, behind that question that we want to address with the analytics. That would be my kind of a higher level strategic view of that. But let me go over to Patrick and say, you know, when these models become complex, and I guess they become mathematically complex, but if you design this the right way, I think it should still support you know, a business context for how we're going to explain the model results. And we'll want to know in advance how those results should be explained, how they should be presented. It's not how we want to visualize, or there may be great you know, Tableau fans out there, but you don't explain it in the terms that are stunning to you. It matters how it's going to be consumed by leadership, and that's what's going to make it sustainable. So that's my pass on it. Patrick, let me go over to you and say, when these models become complex and it becomes difficult to explain the business logic, how would you tackle this, Patrick?
Well, first thing I would do is show the results of using the model and versus the results not using the model. And usually that gets their attention, and it shows them there's a positive result. And then at the next step, a lot of times people want to know not just that the model works, but, you know, what are the predictors of the model? And just showing a very simple bar chart that just shows the relative importance of the predictor variables is usually enough. There's no need to go into the details about the, you know, equation behind the model or any kind of complicated explanation of how the model works. It's just a very simple, you know, horizontal bar chart. You know, here's my top 10 variables. And usually that's enough to make people feel comfortable that, hey, this model makes some sense.
Oh, that's great advice, especially to do the comparisons with and without to show the impact and the true lift if you
Yes.
didn't have the model. That's great advice. Thank you, Patrick. Go on to the next one. This is from Nelikantan, and again, apologies if I didn't get the pronunciation down. Which software should we prefer for big data and analytics? Well, keep in mind, we are a vendor-neutral company. We're even method agnostic. So anything that we would say is not going to give any credibility and we're not going to disparage any products. Having said that, the answer to that question comes from up front the comprehensive assessment that we do. And that's going to measure a number of things, including the size of the data that you have, the nature of the data that you have, the experience of the users, how the results are going to be operationalized, who's going to be consuming the results, what's the budgets available. Software shouldn't be the first thing considered either. It's like starting the book on chapter 5 if you're looking at software before, and it kind of makes sense. Any kind of project that you start with in analytics, you think, well, I need data, I need software. Actually, if you were building a house, you wouldn't start with the bricks and sticks. You'd start with interviewing the future owners. You'd do a site selection. You'd assess the site, and then you develop blueprints even before you start buying the bricks and sticks. And same thing if you're going to do organizational analytics the right way, is to do that comprehensive assessment and understand what's going to be achieved with analytics, and even take a look at it from a process standpoint that, hey, we shouldn't just be doing a single project. Let's assume it's going to be successful, and let's understand how we would start building a factory from the gains that we have on this single project. So when it comes back to software, you can start by doing some basic analytics with a number of very capable open source packages to start proving out your approach, and then later in the build out you can start to determine which investments would be prudent given the information that you've gained from a more comprehensive assessment. Patrick, any comments around software?
Software doesn't matter
as
much as the plan.
Oh, you just crashed my dreams, Patrick. I'm all about software. I want the right package for me. Tell me what that is.
The question about big data implies that you're concerned about, well, how do I apply this model to not just thousands of records, but to potentially tens of millions, billions of records, and that's a different story. I mean, to develop the model, you can use almost any software because you're dealing with samples of data.
Right.
So I'm wondering if your question really has more to do with after you've already developed your plan and you've developed a model. Now, what software is good to score large, huge amounts of data? And that's a kind of different question. But yeah, for model development, I would say there's so many choices, open source and proprietary. Any of them will do a fine job. I would say R, Python, SAS. They're sort of the market leaders. Any of those will be absolutely fine. And like I said, almost any package, will be fine for model development.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you, Patrick. Annie, if you, I'm going to assume that maybe the method you're looking at is that modeling practice framework. Is it meant to work for social media analytics? It's meant as a higher level framework to make analytics overall to be structured and purposeful within a larger organization. So yes, it includes social media analytics. It's any vertical industry. It is a framework, which means that not all parts of it will be used. It's going to be very much tailored, but we have this comprehensive checklist, and there may be some questions on the higher branches that don't apply. We lop off that entire branch, and other parts we're going to get down to the very leaves of that framework and go through very detailed tasks that are very pertinent to an organization situation. So if by method you meant the modeling practice framework, then yes, it is universal for building an analytic practice, not just running through a project or even a process. It's even a higher level than the process because it starts in with looking at an organization's culture and How are we going to deal with mindset shift? And when we start getting the model results, I call it the Jack Nicholson effect. Can leadership handle the truth? Can they start to peel the fingers off the handlebars and start moving from a gut level decisioning position to data driven? So that modeling practice framework considers all those and starts to build that factory that is tailored to the organization's environment, situation, goals, makeup of the team, and everything. So no, it is not specific to structured data, unstructured data, to any particular industry. It really helps to tailor a sustainable practice for any given organization. I appreciate the question. If I understood it correctly, if there's another method you meant, just type it into the Q&A panel. Brian asks two questions. I'll take the first one. It's administrative. Will the slide deck be available after the webinar? We purposely don't record the event or share the deck for one particular reason. We want people to attend live. So by all means, come back next month if you want to see the material again. And of course, each Q&A is unique. So go back to the webinar page of our website and you'll see the next 3 months monthly productions listed out. You can register for whatever works best for your schedule. And Brian's technical question, I'll have you start on this one because I usually get selfish, Patrick. How often are the logarithms, used on values, and are they for typically larger values, logarithms?
Logs are very, very commonly used, especially for continuous variables like sales or amount of time. There's usually sales is probably the most frequently used application of logs. A lot of times taking the log of sales will oftentimes straighten out a kind of a nonlinear relationship between a predictor and a dependent continuous variable.
Great.
So I hope that answers your question. That's your very, very commonly used.
Good, good. Yeah, and if you want to extend it, just type it into the Q&A. We get those live. And Patrick, I know we have for you a hard stop at 12:30, so we've got just a few minutes left. Let me have you also lead on the next question. It's one that I think is more specific to you and beyond my experience. What is selection bias? Why is it important? And how can you avoid it? This question's from Bo.
Well, the way I think about selection bias is really when you're taking a sample of data that you want to build a model from. You want to be sure that the model is being built on a sample of data that's going to generalize to the population. So a lot of times selection bias might mean that if you were modeling only people that volunteered their data, for example, your model would only apply to that very specific set of individuals that decided to share, data with you. You wouldn't really have data that would generalize to everybody in your customer base, for example. So that's one example of selection bias. Oftentimes, selection bias is really talked about more in the context of trying to infer cause and effect when you're trying to analyze the result of a promotion, for example, and you want to find out what is the incremental sales impact of this promotion. Well, a selection bias would mean that you're not able to sample a representative generalizable sample. You're just looking at a small subset of data that won't generalize. That's usually what people mean by selection bias.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I'm in kind of sales situations, I often get questions from prospective clients who say, well, how much experience do you have in our particular industry? And as you know, Patrick, we have on our bench experience that pertains to almost any vertical, where we have fairly specific experience generally in an industry. Specific experience generally. Well, how does that make sense? I guess it's that we do have a lot of working experience across industries where we can talk generally with any organization. But one thing that I think comes into selection bias as it relates to how you form your team is knowing when to include subject matter experts. And there are times, I believe, at the tails of the entire project where we want to understand, particularly in data preparation, we want to understand the context of the data, and we want to understand how to translate the results. But if we include the subject matter expert in some parts of actually model development, we can build in some bias to the actual what would be an otherwise objective model. So we do want to be careful of that as well, and that's where we as consultants understand certainly when to use our customers' experience and their subject matter experts as to as to when we need to maintain the objectivity of the model during its development. So great responses, Patrick. Thanks so much again for filling in for Scott. And by the way, anybody who looks toward the August beta production of the online will see Patrick. Patrick will be facilitating the model development course in the August online beta production that we're going to run in August. So so you had a great taste test of Patrick, I think, making a great impression here. Patrick, we are right at 12:30. I know you have to run. I can wrap it up from here if you wish. Any parting thoughts?
Great. No, thanks very much for the opportunity. Glad I could help.
Okay, thanks again, Patrick. And at half past the hour, we're going to draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for their great segments, and Patrick for your highly informative Q&A contributions. And we'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we'll hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. So make sure to go to the website and check out the schedule and the details for the August beta production of any of TMA's new online classroom courses. This is your one single chance to obtain this highly developed vendor-neutral content presented by the industry's most seasoned predictive modeling consultants at the deepest discount we'll offer ever in exchange for your feedback on our initial online beta productions. Make sure to reserve your space early, as we expect the courses to fill up quickly. Now, if you don't have a training budget, or your schedule just doesn't fit, but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to its TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it. Whether it's tactical or strategical, we can perform as a leader for your application development, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then we'll remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, Patrick, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.